Welcome to this explainer. Today, I'm putting on my skeptical researcher hat to guide you through the bizarre, heavily debated, and often forbidden texts that simply did not make it into the Bible. We are stepping right onto the ancient cutting room floor to look at manuscripts filled with magical mules, edgy childhood tantrums, and highly dramatic trips to the underworld.
Okay, let's dive right into this by looking at how historical church councils actually debated and formalized the official canon. Between the first centuries, when the original texts were written, and later major gatherings like the Council of Rome and the Council of Constantinople, early church leaders rigorously tested the validity of all these writings. They universally agreed on the core books we know today, but in the process, they left literally hundreds of fringe records, letters, and supposed gospels right there on the cutting room floor.
So we're going to systematically break down 24 of these ancient texts across 6 themes. 1. The biblical cutting room. 2. Our tier list criteria. 3. Infancy miracles. 4. Crucifixion lore. 5. Gnostic texts. And 6. The actual cultural value of these legends.
Part 1. The biblical cutting room. Because the Bible was compiled over thousands of years, an enormous amount of supplementary writing naturally sprang up around it. Now, while canonical Bibles contain around 66 to 81 books, depending on your denomination, today we are zeroing in on 24 highly debated apocryphal books. Early communities used these fringe writings to try and define their own specific religious identities. Sometimes they were just trying to fill in historical gaps, and other times they were pushing radical new doctrines.
Part 2. Criteria for the tier list.
To analyze these legends impartially, we've categorized them using a strict tier list framework to really understand exactly why those early councils accepted or rejected them. We're grading these texts as historical, fan fiction, or blasphemy. Historical means it holds real spiritual or contextual value, even if it isn't divinely inspired. Fan fiction represents harmless lore building created by early writers just trying to piggyback off the fame of biblical figures. And blasphemy refers to texts that were straight-up intentional lies meant to mislead or act as propaganda for splinter factions.
When you evaluate their historical accuracy scores, you can really see how wildly these books varied in their grounding of real events. You have something like the Gospel of Nicodemus, which offers compelling historical context, and then you compare that to the entirely fabricated Acts of Paul and Thecla, which early church leaders openly admitted was just completely made up by an overly enthusiastic presbyter.
Part 3. Infancy miracles versus canonical ministry.
This brings us to a truly bizarre category, the infancy gospels. These were texts that basically attempted to fill in the blank years of Jesus' childhood. And the juxtaposition here is absolutely wild. The canonical Jesus is portrayed as a purposeful, forgiving, and mature teacher. Meanwhile, the apocryphal childhood Jesus acts like a vindictive, magical brat. I mean, if another kid bumps into him, he literally strikes them dead. And when the parents complain, he blinds them. It's a complete 180-degree contradiction to the theology of the canonical Gospels.
Then we have the Gospel of James, which uses extreme, almost comical absurdity to aggressively push specific fringe doctrines, like the perpetual virginity of Mary. In one really graphic scene, a skeptical midwife doubts the miraculous birth, and her hand instantly begins to rot away. It's only healed when she is told to touch her decomposing hand to the baby. It reads way more like ancient shock value folklore than serious theology.
In the first Gospel of the Infancy, it is absolutely packed with weird local Egyptian folklore. Picture this. Baby Jesus turns a man who was transformed by a witch into a mule back into a human. Or there's a demonic boy who bites Jesus, is instantly cured, and inexplicably turns out to be a young Judas Iscariot. It even gives a convoluted origin story for the specific spikenard perfume used to wash Jesus' feet 30 years later. It's pure, unadulterated lore expansion.
Part 4. Crucifixion lore and fan fiction.
Shifting away from childhood absurdity to the adult crucifixion narratives, early Christian writers essentially created extensive fan fiction to fill in historical gaps with high drama. These passion texts introduced massive recurrent motifs. They obsessively provided deep backstories for the two thieves on the cross, turning one into a noble Robin Hood figure and the other into a complete monster. They also heavily focused on Pontius Pilate, creating these alternate histories where he either suffers a dramatic, horrific downfall or gets completely redeemed and taken straight to heaven by angels. For example, the Acts of Pilate is essentially an ancient Dante's Inferno. It features an incredibly dramatic sequence called the Harrowing of Hell, where Jesus breaks down the literal gates of the underworld while the devil and his demons panic and argue in complete confusion. It's a deeply fascinating, highly cinematic piece of poetry, but historical church councils never, ever meant for it to be taken as literal canonical history.
Part 5. Gnostics' Texts and Contradictions.
As we reach the climax of our analysis, we encounter texts categorized strictly as blasphemy, where splinter groups actively hijacked Christian history for their own purposes. To understand why they did this, we have to define Gnosticism. This was a fringe movement that believed the physical world was an evil trap. For Gnostics, salvation didn't come from faith or grace. It required secret, exclusive, hidden knowledge meant only for a select few.
When you map out the massive theological contradictions, it becomes crystal clear exactly why historical church councils universally rejected these Gnostic works. Canonical teachings say salvation is for everyone, that Jesus is truthful, and the physical world is God's creation. But Gnostic gospels, like the Gospel of Mary, claim Jesus lied to almost all his disciples, that the physical body is a prison, and that salvation is a secret code reserved strictly for the elite.
The Gospel of Judas takes this to the absolute extreme and completely flips the script. It presents an edgy, cynical narrative where Jesus actively laughs at his ignorant disciples. In this text, Jesus tells Judas that he is the only one who truly understands the universe, and actually asks Judas to betray and kill him so Jesus can finally escape the evil prison of his physical body. It's a total reinvention of the core biblical narrative.
Part 6. Cultural Value of Apocryphal Legends.
So, as impartial researchers, we have to step back and evaluate the true cultural value of these wild legends. If they aren't part of the canon, what do they do for us today? Well, while the apocryphal texts are chaotic and sensational, comparing them to highly regarded historical writings, like the authentic letters of Ignatius, shows a stark contrast. Ignatius was a real martyr writing on his way to execution, and his letters are filled with quiet resilience, urging early Christians toward charity, humility, and unity. This proves that the mainstream early church ultimately valued profound humility over sensational magic tricks or elitist secret knowledge.
Which brings us to a really vital question to wrap up this explainer. Even if these fringe writings are just human inventions, what does their desperate search for expanded lore and secret knowledge reveal about us? They might not be the foundation of a faith, but to any historical researcher, they are a fascinating mirror reflecting our endlessly creative, sometimes messy, human nature. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep questioning the history behind the history.